Okay, let's talk data privacy. This is a very important topic here in Europe. And let's try to get an understanding why this should be important for every business owner. So as we are aware with the fallout from the COVID pandemic, as well as just the direction in which technology is going, your business is more interconnected. Okay, so there's more data for you to manage. Most of that is outside of your control, whether it's in a SaaS application, it's in the cloud, it's third-party information from suppliers and vendors. If it's devices, for example, IoT devices, your users on the move, there's lots more data that's passing around that you don't have control. So the important thing here is to underscore that the bad guys are running a business just like yourself, and they are looking to streamline the operations and get a hold of your sensitive data. So let's speak about some of the principles of data privacy. So there are four key principles. Those principles essentially ensure that there's fair and authorized processing of personally identifiable information. Fair in the sense that, as you can see from the blurb, that data must not be processed in a way that's misleading, that's dodgy, essentially, from the end user's perspective. It must be authorized, so you must have the permission of the user to actually access that data. And when you are processing that data, you have to ensure that you have that custody of care with that data, as long as that data is of any significant value to yourself. And at the end of that life cycle, that data needs to be destroyed. And also to make sure that any data that's attributed to an individual is well protected. Okay. So why is this important? Why data privacy? A few reasons, and they're quite, I guess, evident. One of those is that data is a very valuable target for criminals. So as I'd seen in in previous slides, it's a big business, $1 billion business, and essentially the key thing to take away is that um, your data in of itself isn't valuable. It's the worth of that data to you and the lengths you would go to get that data back that makes it so important. And the criminals know this, and that's why they are targeting businesses heavily for that data. The implications as well too, and why privacy is important is if data is lost for your customers or your employees, there could be severe consequences, whether it's reputational, where once that bad news gets out, you've got a bad publicity or press, you will end up losing customers, losing that standing within the industry. But also too, there are massive penalties if you are actually found to have been in contravention of the laws of the governance around protecting data. And so uh, data privacy is important because it goes quite in sync or in alignment with cybersecurity practices as well as data protection related to sensitive data. And so let's take a look at some of the risk to data that we need to be aware of. So firstly, you have those cybersecurity risks. So these are associated with technology-related incidents that might impact the availability, the integrity, or the confidentiality of software, hardware, and related processes. So they must be configured and secured properly to minimize that type of risk. Another type is privacy risk. So this is when personal information falls into the hands of unauthorized individuals, and the victims may experience problems ranging from dignity type effects such as embarrassment, stigma, to maybe more tangible harm such as discrimination, economic loss, physical harm, for example. So sources of privacy risk include non-technological factors such as conversation and paper document disposal. So these two types of risk actually feed into what are called cybersecurity related privacy events. So that's where there's a failure of both the cybersecurity and privacy measures which result in data breaches. And so to protect privacy, you need to control how data is being used across the data lifecycle, which means as an organization, you need policies to ensure data privacy and security. For example, correctly identifying sensitive data, both for the organization as well as personal. You need to ensure that there are secure methods in place to protect that data, and it's only accessed by authorized personnel. And here are some numbers around, what the implications from a financial perspective could be if you're not in alignment with the regulation. So as you can see, this is from GDPR. So GDPR applies to businesses that offer goods to or services to EU residents, but also to, if you monitor the behavior of users inside the EU, you need to be aligned with GDPR. And so if you are found to be in contravention of these particular articles, you could be facing a fine of, if it's UK GDPR, around 20 million euros, or 4% of your annual global turnover. So the key takeaway is privacy has changed the landscape, and it continues to do so. And these laws are transportable, so they apply to you um, if you do business in other countries. Okay, so there has to be a habit of joining towards a common consensus within this particular space. So we're talking about personal data and privacy. So what is personal data? So under GDPR, personal data is any information that relates to a living person who can be directly or indirectly identified using that information. So here are some common examples: name, home address, email address, phone number, identification card number, passport number, for example. So those are direct examples of personal data, but also these that are on the screen now, they can be considered personal data based on other information associated with these types of data. So for example, location data, if you're captured on CCTV and there's other data that a bad actor has of yourself, that can be used to personally identify yourself. Okay. So when we speak about personal data, there's some key things to understand from a GDPR perspective. So the key principles around the privacy of that data, there are 7 key principles. The first one is lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. So essentially, your business, your organization needs to ensure that data collection practices don't break the law, and that you aren't hiding anything from the data subjects. So state in your privacy policy the type of data you're collecting and the reason you are collecting it. The second principle is purpose limitation. So this is where organizations, your business, you should only collect personal data for a specific purpose and clearly state what that purpose is, and only collect data for as long as necessary to complete that purpose. Third principle, data minimization, or King's speech. So this is where you must only process the personal data that is needed to achieve its processing purpose. So doing so has 2 major benefits. First, in the event of a data breach, the unauthorized individual will only have access to a limited amount of data. And secondly, data minimization makes it easier to keep data accurate and up to date. Okay, which leads to the fourth, which is accuracy. So the accuracy of personal data is integral to data protection. So GDPR states that um, every reasonable step must be taken to erase or rectify data that is inaccurate or incomplete. And individuals actually do have the right to request that inaccurate or incomplete data be erased or rectified within 30 days. Storage limitation. So similarly, um, you need to delete personal data when it's no longer necessary. And the sixth principle, as you can see here, is integrity and confidentiality. So this is the only principle that actually deals explicitly with security. So GDPR states that personal data must be processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security of the personal data. Um, and that includes protection against unauthorized processing, but also to accidental loss, damage, destruction, and so forth. And the last principle, which is quite key as well, is accountability. So By achieving accountability, you're going to demonstrate that you have the necessary documentation to prove that you are meeting the compliance requirements. And so under GDPR as well, we need to be aware that users have their rights that are enshrined in law. So essentially, these user rights, as you can see, are designed to determine that those we trust with our data, they use it in a way that is fair and reasonable. There is an issue here, though. While you may look after data in a trustworthy way, what happens if your company is compromised by a threat actor? And so we need to have a new conversation speaking about who owns the data in your network. We call that the data responsibility pie. So let's start with the data owner. So the data owner or the data controller, eventually if that data is leaked, then ultimately you will have that responsibility as the data owner. The second piece of the pie is the information technology team or the data processor. Typically, normally this is your MSP. So essentially who you trust to provide the technology and the infrastructure that the data resides on. And lastly, we've got the info security team or the data processor. Um, Typically can be your MSP as well too. And the info security team is going to inform the data owner on how they can better secure the data, usually with upgraded technology and services that information technology team will manage. So ultimately, it will be the data owner that makes the decisions on what measures will be in place and sets the budget allocated to do so. So essentially, from a privacy perspective, it's all about making sure that you've got the data protection controls in place to ensure privacy. So it's about a multi-layered approach. Here's just some examples of some of those layers you can use to make sure that you're protecting data, ensuring the privacy of the data as well to personal data, and making sure that you are in line with the compliance requirements, for example, GDPR.